focus on living a life of service. But many of his words spoke to the goal of financial freedom. In a sermon delivered just before his assassination, Dr. King warned about the dangers of spending too much on cars and houses and said that keeping up with the Joneses can be a destructive force. Dr. King went on to say that economists advise spending no more than twice your annual income on a new house. Unfortunately, advice like that would be impossible for many Americans today. Some other economic gains he wished to see have been slow to arrive. Black Americans are still 2.5 times more likely to live in poverty than whites. While many injustices persist, we hope you all learn something from today's discussion and fight for the financial freedom you deserve, all while doing it and lifting up others as well. So right now, Richard will speak. If you have any questions during this talk, we will please put them in the chat and we will answer them during the Q&A session. Richard?
Thank you, Elisa. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opening, and I'll keep my words brief. As we know, financial freedom is a light for which many people have died in darkness, and it's one of the key tenets of Dr. King's teachings is that if we're educated, then we're going to be better able to manage our future and ultimately our finances. So I'm really proud to partner with the African American Resource Center and recognize the financial wellness team at Penn, Lindsay Burcham and Jamil Atkinson, as well as Alooola, the financial advisory organization we partner with. Will be sharing some really good and practical tips that will really help us get to the economic future that Dr. King had envisioned. So thank you very much.
Great. So give me 1 sec and I will share our slides. Awesome. So hi, we are Financial Wellness Penn. Today we're just going to talk a little bit about our program and sort of how we teach students about personal finance at Penn. We're going to go over some of the key components that make up our program and our philosophy that we follow when we talk about personal finance with students. And then we will talk to you about some of those key components that we focus on. So again, I'm Lindsay. I manage the Financial Wellness at Penn program. We also have a phenomenal team of students. I have one with me today. Jamil, do you want to just introduce yourself briefly?
Hey everyone, I'm Jamil. As Lindsay said, I'm a peer educator with the program, and I'm also a senior in Wharton studying finance.
Great. Okay, so first, oops, looks like I skipped a slide. We're going to start by talking about our program and sort of what really guides us in the work that we do. So first, our mission statement is on the screen here. I'm not going to read through it thoroughly. I think the important things to highlight here are that we teach all Penn students about personal finance. I think something that makes our program unique is we support both undergraduate and graduate students at Penn. And so that means we support a really diverse group of students from 18-year-olds who are going out on their own for the first time and being away from their family to folks who are literally in their 30s returning to PhD programs or master's programs or whatever it may be. And so despite having that really wide range of students that we interact with, a lot of them have the same questions about personal finance. So everyone can benefit from the opportunity to learn. Usually when I talk about our mission, I also like to highlight that, we firmly believe that personal finance education doesn't solve all money problems. So, as an example, in addition to managing this program, I'm also a Penn alum. I graduated in 2019. And when I was a student, I was a first-gen low-income student. I budgeted the way that I was supposed to. I managed my credit the way I was supposed to. It didn't make me less poor. It just meant that I was doing the best that I could to manage what I had available to me at the time. And so we always like to highlight that, you can't solve every money problem with a budget. It's just not as simple as that. And so that's something that we really try to bring into everything that we teach to students. So just to go a little deeper into our philosophy, this is pulled straight from the training that we give to our students. We just hired some new peer educators, so they literally just looked at this. These are sort of the key tenets that we follow in everything that we do. So the first is that we highlight financial wellness over financial literacy. And the reason for that is there's nothing wrong with talking about financial literacy. But to us, financial literacy is just understanding the language, understanding the jargon, the literal, like, how do you make a budget? We focus on financial wellness because that's more about how to practice personal finance strategies and habits in the way that is most meaningful for you as an individual. And so it takes financial literacy just a little step higher. We also like to highlight that personal finance is personal. And this kind of goes along with the tenet that's two below this, it's impossible to define objective good or bad when it comes to personal finance. When it comes to personal finance, there are numerous decisions that folks could make. I don't think any of those are inherently good or bad. What makes something good or bad is what it means for the individual. And it's up to that individual to decide if it's good or bad. I think it's really easy to cast judgment on others and the decisions they make. The example I always like to give is kind of a shot at myself. I spend a ridiculous amount of money on ordering dinner every month because I get home at the end of the day and I'm tired and I don't want to cook. And sometimes that just happens. I'm okay with that. I have built it into my budget. It's something I have learned about myself and I have accommodated for in my finances in the way that makes most sense to me. So one single example of a way that things don't have to be good or bad. Something else that we like to highlight, and this is actually one of the things we're going to talk about in more detail later, is that every personal finance decision you make should start with a goal. I will detail this later, but basically your decisions are really arbitrary if you don't know, like, what is the end thing you are working toward. And I think it can be really hard to know what you want long-term. And so what happens is you kind of just make decisions because you feel like it's the right thing to do, or one of your friends has done it. And so you think it's what you should be doing. But that doesn't mean anything to you as an individual. It's not personalized. And then the last thing I want to highlight is that we offer education, not advice. So again, I feel like this kind of fits into the whole theme here that, like, there is no one right way to do things. The way I see it is, as Financial Wellness at Penn, it is our job to provide students with the whole picture of what their options are, and then help them figure out what is the best option for them based on their circumstances and their priorities. There is never going to be the same exact situation across a few students. And so that is one of the reasons we focus on education rather than advice. So just to talk a little bit more about how we provide that education that I just talked about. We have online educational modules that are available through our website. I have included links for pretty much everything that's here. There's not a link for the workshops, but you can find it through our website link. So on our website, we have some educational modules that students can look at in their own time, even if there are audience members here who are not students, staff, faculty, whoever you may be. Feel free to use our website as a resource for yourself, for your kids, for whoever's in your life. I might be a little biased, but I think we've made it pretty easy to understand. So folks can peruse that at their own discretion at any time. We also host a lot of workshops. So the two things I'll highlight are, we do some regular workshop series. So we do a Financial Friday series every semester where we talk about niche personal finance topics that are relevant at the time. So as an example, our January Financial Fridays, is about how to budget student account refunds, which many of our students just received refunds from their financial aid, whether it's from grant-based financial aid or loan-based financial aid. So that's just one example. And then we also have 9 workshops that are available to be requested. So pretty much any student group, any campus office that meets with a specific cohort of students can ask us to come to them and talk about a topic from that list of 9. So if you find yourself in that position and would like to request a workshop, please do so. They are presented by our wonderful peer educators. And yeah, we find that those tend to be the ones where we're able to get a little bit more out of the audience, because when we're able to meet students in groups that they're already a part of, it's a little easier to talk about money. It's hard to talk about money, especially if you're in a setting where you don't know anyone else and it feels really private. So we really like to be able to provide that opportunity. Something that is new, it started last semester. We have a peer counseling program now. Again, it is available for all Penn students, including undergrad, grad, whatever program students are in. They can self-schedule their appointment with a member of our team. I included a short link if folks would like to access it now. I do want to highlight it is only available for current students. So if you know any alums who are interested, they can always email us, and if we have availability, we might be willing to talk with them, but it's not something we offer regularly. And then the last thing to highlight is we're pretty active on social media, and we have a bi-weekly newsletter. So we have the same social media handle for both Instagram and Facebook, and it's included there. And then there's a link to sign up for our newsletter. So those are the things that we do. Now let's talk a little bit more about why we think goal setting is really the foundation for all personal finance decisions. So I said this earlier, but without goals, financial decisions are arbitrary. And I wanted to highlight that this was kind of mentioned earlier as well in, the discussion about Dr. King's approach to personal finance education as well. It can be really bad to follow the sort of keeping up with the Joneses mentality. And that is often what happens if you approach personal finance decisions without setting goals in advance. So, especially with working with college age students, we are constantly hearing from folks saying, well, I want to open an IRA because my friend did it, and they told me that I need to be investing right now or I'm going to fail. Like, I'm just never going to have money in my life. And that sounds really dramatic, and it is kind of dramatic. And that's like how the students are genuinely feeling when they come to us, is like, if I don't do this right now, like my life is over. This is the end. So we like to bring it back down a little bit. It's not quite as bad as it seems. And so often when students come to us and want to talk about things like investing, which, don't get me wrong, it's very important at this age. But we want folks to come back to this level before they get there. When they come into us and say they want to talk about investing, we bring it back down to this level because it's hard to start something like that if you don't even know what you're trying to reach at the end. So goals help you narrow down what you actually want, and then from there, how you'll get there. So the main way that we talk about goals with students is in the context of using goal attainment strategies to better identify what you're hoping to achieve and then how you're going to get there. There are 2 primary goal attainment strategies that we talk about with students. One of them is SMART goals. I always like to tell folks, you probably literally heard about this in elementary school. I think it's used in academic settings a lot because basically it's identifying like the nitty gritty details of what you want to achieve. So SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So it's basically asking you, what exactly are you working toward? How are you literally going to measure it? Like, at what quantifiable point are you going to know that you have reached the goal? Can you feasibly accomplish this in the way that you want to? Relevant is really about, how does this fit in with the rest of your life? Does this seem it sounds a little cheesy to say this, but like, is it on brand for you? Does it make sense for who you are and what your priorities are? And then time-based. When are you gonna achieve this? Because if you just set a goal and you say, I want to save money, save how much, by when, what do you want to do? So that's one of the strategies. And then the other one we talk about a lot is Whoop. I really like this one, maybe because it just speaks to me a lot as somebody who often has big things that I want to accomplish. And then things happen, we are human, we are fallible. So Whoop is an acronym that prompts you to anticipate potential obstacles and then determine how you're going to overcome them. So the acronym stands for WISH. So what are you trying to reach? Outcome. For outcome, you want to visualize, like, how are you going to feel if you achieve this goal? You want to remind yourself of how good it's going to feel, why you're working toward it, why it's meaningful, etc. The second O is obstacle. So what possible internal obstacle could come up to prevent you from reaching this goal of yours? And then the P is for plan. So if the obstacle happens, what are you going to do to overcome it? How are you feasibly going to continue working toward your goal? So that is sort of our approach to goal setting, why we think it's important. And when we talk about goal setting with students, they often say to us like, well, I just don't know where to start. So we have a recommended path of where to start. So again, start with goal setting. Your goal literally could be as simple as, I want to better understand my finances. I think this is something we often talk about with first-year students who come to us and say, like, I'm managing money for the first time on my own. I have a work study job. I've never earned a paycheck before. I don't know what to do with it. Sometimes understanding your finances is all it takes. And that sort of moves into budgeting, which Jamil is going to talk a little bit about after this. But with budgeting, it doesn't have to be intense. Your goal with budgeting could literally be, I want to know how much money on average I am making and spending every month. And, setting that as a tangible goal that you want to identify these key numbers. That's a really great starting point. And it seems really small, but for a lot of students, that's really where they have to start, is simply understanding. And then you can get to things like, I'm going to set a goal related to budgeting because I want to go on a spring break trip with my friends. I know I need X amount of money. I'm going to make a plan for how I'm going to reach that amount. And that sort of brings us into saving. So we also like to encourage students to start saving for the future now. I know the term emergency fund is tossed around a lot. I am partial to calling it an uncertainty fund instead, because I don't think it always has to be for emergencies. I think it's for any unanticipated cost that comes up. Life happens. I think at this point, especially with the way the pandemic has gone in the past 2 years, we know anything can happen at any time to completely upend everything you think you know. And that includes your financial life as well. So we like to encourage students to start saving, especially as they're getting closer and closer to the time that they graduate and become adults, or think they've become adults. It's really important. And I think a lot of folks get started a little late on that, including myself when I was in that position as a student. And then we talk about debt. I listed it as credit because for undergrads, that's typically the way that we talk about debt. Most undergrads at Penn are not taking on student loans or really any other kind of loans at this point in their life. But building credit is something that's really important. And that's something we talk a lot about with really all range of students. I literally talked to a friend of mine who graduated with me from Penn 3 years ago now. And she is applying for her first credit card, 3 years post-grad. People go at their own times, right? And so that's another one of the topics we talk about in terms of goal setting. So, whether that means I want to learn how to check a credit report, or I want to apply for one credit card because I want to start building credit. that is sort of what we see as the next step after saving. And then the last one is investing. So I said this earlier, but students often come to us thinking this is the first step. And so we bring them back to square one, goal setting, and sort of work up to it with all of these things. But we do think investing is sort of the next step in going above and beyond what you should be doing at this age. I'm going to throw Jamil under the bus a little bit, but he's been talking for the past few weeks about how compound interest is ridiculous. Literally those words. And so we do think investing is really important for folks at this age. We just want to make sure that they're doing it in an informed way. So sometimes, goals related to investing are like determine, what is your time horizon for any investing you might want to do. Is this something you're hoping to have in the near term? Is it money you hope to have in the long term? Are you thinking about retirement at the age of 20? I love to hear that, but it's very rare. So that's sort of how we think about goal setting. Once we talk about goals, most goals involve some sort of budgeting. So I'm going to pass it off to Jamil to talk about budgeting now.
Sweet. Thanks, Lindsay. So as Lindsay kind of said earlier, we really think about any type of personal finance or financial wellness conversation being rooted in goal setting. And then to budgeting. And you can kind of think of budgeting or the way we think about budgeting is it's kind of an entry point to the world of personal finance once you've kind of established what your goals are. And as Lindsay briefly touched on earlier, a budget can just be a plan that allows you to reflect on what it is that you make, so your income and your expenses. And it really doesn't have to be much more than that. Oftentimes students, and I'm included in this, like I'm not excluded at all. Oftentimes students feel that budgeting is very restrictive and it can be very anxiety producing. And math, and quite frankly, if you're not, I guess, very good with numbers. But from our perspective, and we often encourage students to feel this way as well, or to think about it in this way as well. Budgeting doesn't necessarily have to be any of those things. It could really just be the first step to understanding how it is you interact with money, and that is make and how you spend it. And kind of the last thing I'd highlight just on this reframing of budgeting is that it is practice. It is not something that you kind of just do one time for the year or life really, and then just never come back to it. It is a constant practice, something that you'll have to regularly do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's something that you have to do every day or anything of that sort. We often suggest to students that it's fine if you set a budget and you choose a time that you want to go over that budget every week. At the end of the week, it could be, Sunday mornings before you start homework or whatever is, very comfortable and feasible for you. And that's just to ensure that you are regularly adjusting and kind of keeping up with the plan that you've set in place. With that, I'll move to the next slide just to kind of think about our standard budgeting process. So we think about budgeting in 5 steps, and it's going to seem incredibly simple. And we think, or we just encourage students to also think that way. But it really just going to start with you tracking your income and expenses for a month. So this is just your current situation to see what your interactions are with money, or what your interactions are with money. And after you've kind of tracked both your income and expenses for a month, you then have a bit of a better, you're just in a better position to kind of reflect and potentially notice any trends that may occur, regarding your income or expenses. You may see that at some point in the month, you regularly spend towards the end of the month or something of that sort. But after you've tracked your income and expenses for a month, then it's just going to be about identifying your income. So this could be regular, paychecks, or it could be, some support from members or friends on a regular basis. It's important to think about all of these things as income. A student account refund is also a similar thing. And then you want to identify all of your expenses. So, you could typically think you have like rent, you have food, you have to feed yourself. You might want to buy new clothes, books, all types of things. And there's many ways to think about, what expenses that you might incur. We tend to think about them in like two ways. That is fixed expenses versus variable. So this would be things, if you lived off campus, you paid rent. I mean, you're regularly going to incur that expense, likely in the same amount and at the same time each month, versus, a variable expense could be, the amount of money that you spend on food for takeout, or you might go shopping with some friends or like something of that sort. And then after you've kind of identified both your income and expenses and like more generally, or just better understand the picture, we would recommend that you could set boundaries. Now, it's not something that all students do. I don't do this at all. I typically just regularly track how much I'm receiving as far as income and how much I'm spending, just to see like what that balance is. And there might be some months in which I may spend more than I received, in which I spent some of my savings. But for me, kind of as I was highlighting before, budgeting does not have to be restrictive. It really could just be a personalized look at what it is that you do with your money and how you interact with it. But if you find that you feel like you're spending certain categories a bit much and you'd like to cut that back, you can easily set a limit. To talk about ways to implement those limits kind of tangibly in a counseling session. And then lastly, it's just going to be about reflecting and regularly adjusting as needed. You might get a new job that's going to affect your income. There might be new expenses that you kind of have to encounter. So as I kind of highlighted earlier, like it's definitely not a one-time process. It's something that you do consistently. Doesn't have to be every day, but it can be something that you do on a more regular cadence, like every week, every couple of weeks, every month, just to kind of see what your feelings are regarding your interaction or like your interactions with money. Now, I say all that to say, this is our standard process. It could look very different for all of you all, for anyone. And also, this process doesn't largely interact at all with or discuss implementation. So for example, I typically budget through a spreadsheet. It's just very easy for me, and I just feel much more in control. There are others on our team that use an app like Mint or Clarity Money or Q Capital. There's all types of them. And it really is just going to be dependent on like what you want to do. Using a spreadsheet or pen and paper is a bit more work and time intensive than using an app that automates everything for you. But it really depends on the type of person that you are and what it is that you feel like is going to help you feel most just empowered in the process of budgeting. But with that, I'll pass it back to Lindsay if there's anything else she wanted to add. But if not, then I'll pass it to Carol from Alooola.
Yeah, that was good. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and then Alooola can take over.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Let's just pull up the presentation real quick. All right. Can everyone see the screen?
Good.
Perfect. Okay, so just for background, Lindsay kind of mentioned a little bit. So my name is Rob Michael. This is Carol Ann Fernandez. If you couldn't tell, we're siblings. So we co-founded Alooola, and it's really focused around education. We realized that the traditional wealth management, asset management industry is very focused on, the 1%, the wealthy individuals, because that's the most profitable for them. But as a result, a huge population was being ignored, and we wanted to address that through education. So we partner with corporations, we partner with universities. Lindsay and her group and the Penn healthcare system are all people that we kind of provide free education, free resources to. So if you are tied to the Penn community, feel free to reach out to us as a resource, just like you. And we encourage you to reach out to Lindsay and her team. But with that, I'll hand it off to Carol, who can tell you a little bit about what we're going to actually talk about.
Yeah, so we're going to try to keep it pretty high level and short tonight, but feel free to ask any questions in the chat or afterwards, and we can dig in more deeply or after if you want to reach out to us, as Rob said. So we're just going to talk about investing, why to do it, maybe some time horizons, portfolio allocations, and the goals of it.
Yeah, and I should caveat here that one of the points that Lindsay made that I think is crucial is, we're kind of talking about, I think, what a lot of people look at as the kind of fun part of their finances, or at least a lot of people enjoy it. But this really has to be secondary to you understanding the base of your finances and budgeting, because if you start investing without understanding that as step one, you're not, setting yourself up for success. But assuming that you've kind of sat with Lindsay or understand your own budgeting and you've put in the time to educate yourself, this would be kind of the logical next step.
So just to cover a little bit of what is investing and set everyone on the same page. So more the budgeting and what you're using on a daily basis to cover your expenses are going to be in what you would think as your traditional savings or checking account. So these are short-term, goals that you're covering, such as your rent or daily expenses. It's easy to access, usually through ATMs. It's pretty safe in the sense that it's insured, but especially now, you're not really making anything off that money. Actually, you're losing to inflation in it. So we always say you should keep in your savings and checking account, 3 to 6 months of what we would say is an emergency fund. So that's definitely important to have. But on the other end, and what we're going to focus mainly on tonight is investing, which is more long-term goal focus. So, usually we don't encourage our clients to be investing unless they're doing it for a goal that's at least 5 years or more out. It's a little bit harder to get the cash because you are investing it in funds. So you have to liquidate it before you can get it. And it definitely involves risk, which is also how you get the return. So the more risk you take, usually the higher return you can get ultimately, which is why you want to keep it as a long-term goal.
Yeah. And I think one thing to just, clarify for the saving or bank account, when we say, you're actually losing money to inflation, a lot of people know that, especially in today's world, but essentially what that means is the price of the goods and services that you use, whether it's food or anything else, are going up, but the bank's not paying you and increasing your money. So, the real value of your money is going down. And as a result, you don't want to hold too much money. So we try to tell people keep 3 to 6 months worth of your expenses. So if you have, if roughly you spend $2,000 a month, you're going to want to keep, a minimum of $6,000 in your account, but you can do, slightly more over time. So, now that we've kind of established the difference between what you're saving in your bank account as an emergency fund versus what you may want to deploy as an investment, there's lots of ways that you can invest. And I think one of the disservices that our industry does is it throws around a lot of terminology, right? There's dividends, there's hedge funds, there's private equity, there's mutual funds, there's ETFs. And we're going to kind of, bring it down to a base level and say, well, what is fundamentally at the base or the core of what most people are investing in? And for us, that's stocks and bonds, right? So I always use this analogy, and I apologize if you've been at some of our other webinars that we've done, but I find it helpful, to use this example of Johnson & Johnson, right? So let's say that Johnson & Johnson is doing really well. They're, producing a lot of Band-Aids and Tylenol, and you want to own them, right? So they'll give you a piece of paper, which is called a stock, right? And you can buy that stock for $10, again, using made up numbers here. If Johnson & Johnson continues doing really well, you can, because you have that stock, you are actually an owner of the company. It may not feel like you're a big owner. It's not like you own 50%. You probably own 0.0001% of the company, but you're an owner, right? So what that means is if the company is doing really well, you might be able to go to the market or the community and say, does anyone else want to be an owner of Johnson & Johnson? And a lot of people want to be an owner. So they bid it up and they buy it from you for $15. So you bought it for 10, you sold it for 15, that's your gain, right? The reverse is also true. If a scandal comes out and no one wants to own Johnson & Johnson, when you go to sell it, it can be worth $2, right? So that's the risk of stocks, is it has more volatility, but historically, at least with American corporations, you've done significantly better in stocks. And that's what that green line is really showing, is there's more volatility, which is why the line's not stable, but over time it grows faster. Bonds actually act a very different way because they're more like debt. So let's say Johnson & Johnson wants to expand and create a new factory, but they don't have enough money to build that factory on their own. What they're going to do is go out to the community and say, who will give us $1,000? If you do that, if you do give us $1,000, we'll give you a certificate called a bond. And in a year, we'll give you back your $1,000 plus an extra $5. So you get $1,005. So the 5 is actually what you're making. So as a result, it's much more secure, it's stable, because unless the company's going to go out of business, you'll get your principal plus some money back. And that's why it's much more income oriented, a lot more conservative. And you see that line, that blue line is much more stable. So you don't get as much volatility, but it also doesn't grow as fast.
So the next part we want to go into is like, why would you invest at all?
Yeah. And I think this has to do with the return, right? So we talked about this before, but the return, and it's actually even higher now after the last couple of years. But on average, since 1928, the S&P 500 has returned somewhere between 7 and 10%, depending on how you calculate it. That's better than any other return in any major asset class, right? So as a result, it's very attractive over time to be invested in the stock market, especially when wages most years, last year was kind of an anomaly, aren't rising nearly as fast, right? So if you're relying only on your income, you're not going to compound your wealth as much as if you have some of your money in the market. Now, the one thing that's really important that we always want to show this graph is that it's not uniform, right? So just because on average, on an annualized basis, you're going to get somewhere between a 7 and 10% return doesn't mean it'll happen every year, right? So you had 2008, you had the Great Depression, you had 2020 when COVID hit, right? You have these massive drops, and you need to be prepared for that, which is why Carol Ann kind of mentioned the longer timeline is really important, because you don't want to be investing for a year and lose 30% of your money and need to pull it out, right? If you have a longer time horizon and the market pulls back, you don't have to worry about it because you have 5 years to make it up. And historically, at least, that has been a good recipe to grow your wealth.
And the other thing that we hear a lot of people say is, well, I don't have a lot of money to be investing, right? Like I'm either just a student or I just got my first job, I have student debt, whatever it is. And so we found this chart is kind of helpful to illustrate the fact that you don't need to be investing a lot to make a big difference, especially if you're doing it for the long term. So if you were to put in $200 a year, which if you break that down by a week is basically a coffee, and at age 25 and let it go till you're 65, you'd be getting over $25,000. If you do the same thing, but you just wait to start 10 years from then and start when you're 35, you still make a lot. There's still the compounding effect over $14,000, but you've essentially lost out on what we're calling free money, or that compounding effect, just by waiting that extra 10 years. So, everyone obviously needs to, as Lindsay was talking about earlier, like budgeting is very important. You need to make sure that you're taking care of that first before ever coming to the investments. But when you are ready to invest, even if it's a small amount, doing that earlier than later will have a huge effect on your overall wealth.
Mm-hmm. So we thought we'd just focus now. Caroline mentioned it before, the time horizon, but basically really like honing in on what that means to you.
Yeah, so we break it into three: short, medium, and long. And sorry about the spelling there on the short. But generally, we look at short time horizon as less than 3 years. So in this case, it'd be more of what you'd be putting in your bank account. It's liquidity. It's near-term goals that you have in the next few years that you would really be focusing on. The medium and long-term horizons are more where you look for investment. So medium being around 3 to 7 years, maybe you're saving for a house, going to get married, whatever it is. And so you will invest a little bit more conservatively than maybe if you had 7 years or greater, the long-term horizon, but you're still able to take on some of that risk and get the effect of that compounding effect and the return of the market over the long term.
Yeah. And the way you can think about it, we mentioned stocks and bonds, right? And stocks are more volatile, they take more risk, but over time, historically, they've done better than bonds, right? Bonds are more conservative, more income oriented, but they don't grow as fast, right? So the way you can think about it, and this is just an illustration, right? We're focusing on retirement here, but it could be any goal. It could be, buying a house, like Carol Ann said. It could be getting married. It could save for your kids, whatever your goals are, right? But in this scenario, when you're planning for retirement, when you're 30 years old, you have several decades before you need that money, right? So the majority of your wealth, your investments can be in equities, and equities is just another word for stocks. So, they're the exact same thing. They're just different terminology. So you can put 90% of your money in stocks, right? So most people on this call are relatively young. If you're investing with a long-term horizon, you can afford to put most of your money in stocks and take that risk because you don't need the money right away. As you get closer to retirement, you're going to want to make it more and more conservative, which is why you see that gray area get bigger and bigger, which is the bond portion, the more conservative portion. Now, obviously, these are not the only two asset classes, but it's a good illustration to basically say you need to be aligning your timeline and your goals with your investments. You can't kind of keep them separate because, again, it's a recipe for, failure if you don't align those two. So this is kind of, okay, the tangible question that comes next is, well, how do I actually invest? I understand stocks and bonds. I understand the benefit of investing. How do I actually get started? How do I do it, right? A lot of people have preferences of what platform to use, et cetera. We always like this slide because we break it into, rather than what platforms we like or don't like, we break it into your personality, right? So are you the type of person that likes to do everything yourself, to you actually enjoy researching stocks and researching the market and researching wealth? Well, then maybe going onto a do-it-yourself platform makes sense, where you don't really have any support or help, but you can trade and you can create an account, right? Do you want total support? Do you want to have a human advisor who can kind of hold your hand through the process, do a full financial plan, kind of understand the specifics of your life? Then maybe you go to a traditional financial advisor at Fidelity or Bank of America or Morgan Stanley. Do you want a little bit of both of those, where you get some human support, but you don't have to pay the hefty fee? Well, maybe you're doing something like an investment only or a hybrid model. That's where Alooola is, Charles Schwab, Vanguard, Betterment, Wealthfront, all of these kind of play in that area. Maybe you get at that, right? And the key here is there's no right or wrong answer. You just have to make sure that whoever you're working with, whether it's a platform or a person, align with your goals, right? And some key questions that you should be asking yourself, and hopefully whoever you're working with, is, what are your fees, right? A lot of people think they're not paying any fees. They're always paying fees some way, right? What are your goals aligned with my goals, right? So are you incentivized to sell me a certain product or put me in a certain investment? Are you a fiduciary, meaning you have to act in my best interest, right? And those are the type of questions that you should just be asking, researching, and talking about before you kind of put a huge amount of your wealth on one platform. And I realize that at this point in your life, you don't have a ton of wealth, but at some point you will, and developing that relationship matters.
And you can always change. So you can start on one platform. Your money is never tied somewhere. So, if someone's saying you can't move your money, that's inappropriate. You can always move it and change to a new platform if you find someone or some platform you like better.
Mm-hmm.
So the last part we just wanted to talk about is kind of goals of investing. And one of the things that, people tend to make a mistake in is pulling out at the wrong time. So what this is showing is that the market overall has a lot of ups and downs. And we were kind of talking about this earlier, depending on, the year and what's going on in the world, the market will adjust based on that. But overall, in the long term, it's still increasing. It's still going up. So really, you want to protect yourself from yourself to some extent. If you're a long-term focused and you're investing for the long term, and so you're going to be more growth focused and have more stocks in that chart that Rob had up earlier, there are going to be days where you're going to look in your market and your account is definitely going to be down. But if you're disciplined enough to not pull out, and that's where having someone you're working with might be helpful, you overall should increase your account in the long run.
Yeah. There's always reasons to get out of the market, and your emotions are always the reason that you do it. And no one, ourselves included, no professional has a crystal ball. No one is perfect at timing the market. So the result is you shouldn't try to time the market. You should just come up with a strategy and stick with it. And obviously you can allocate differently and make adjustments over time, but you shouldn't be pulling out of the market and then trying to time it and get back in, because that rarely works. And just to kind of, push this point home, we wanted to show you an illustration that basically says, people who mistime the market lose a huge amount of their long-term wealth. So what this shows is, if you had invested $100,000 in January 1st of 2000 and then kept it for 2 decades and sold it at the end of 2019, that $100,000 would have more than tripled, and you'd have roughly $325,000, $324,000, right? That's a massive amount of wealth that you've just built out. Now, over that entire 20 years, if you had just missed 5 of the best days in the market, instead of having $324,000, you'd have $214,000, right? Just 5 days out of 20 years, right? And you can see as you miss more and more of those days, your wealth continues to go down. And in fact, you can start losing money. And this is important because what people don't often realize is some of the best days in the market happen right after some of the worst, right? So if you were in 2008 and you saw your portfolio drop by more than 30%, that's obviously really hard to stomach, even if you're saving for retirement, so you don't need it right away. And a lot of people pulled their money out of the market. Well, that's really tough when you hit the bottom of the market and no one knows when that's going to happen. And you have some of the best days and you weren't participating, right? So your wealth didn't grow during those best days. So you lose out in the long term. And to Carol Ann's point, compounding is everything, right? So we purposely try to kind of speed through that and leave their time for questions or comments or anything. But just know you can reach out to us. You can reach out to Lindsay or anyone if you have any questions about budgeting or finances in general. I'll stop sharing here.
Thank you so much, Carol and Rob. That was a really great explanation. And Lindsay for telling us about Financial Wellness at Penn and budgeting from Jamil. So now if you can, I'd like to open up to any questions. See if we have any. So Diane asked, how does one miss a day in the market?
So, an example would be, let's say I invested $1,000 today, and then the market drops 20% tomorrow because, a scandal comes out or Congress is, having a big argument. So I see my portfolio go from $1,000 down 20%. That's really hard. So I sell all my investments and I take my money out of the market. It's still sitting as cash in my account, but I'm not invested in anything. And then the next day it goes up by 40%. Again, I'm making these numbers completely up, but I was sitting in cash because I sold everything and the market went up 40%. So that's how you miss a day in the market.
That makes sense. I have a question because I actually heard that like right now when things are seeming to be dropping, it's a good time to buy stocks. Is that true? What does that, I guess, is that sort of like buying them on sale, as some people say?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like we use it as though you go to department store in the old days, and they're having a big sale. You can obviously buy more things for less money. It's kind of the same deal. So especially if you're going to be investing for a while, it's great to get in when the market's down because you can actually buy things that would be more expensive later when they go up again. So we actually, for a lot of our clients, look for down days to kind of start it to get them in the market. Yeah.
And I'd say the only kind of caveats I'd put on that is sometimes companies are going down because they're bad companies, right? So, not everything that's going down or on sale is a reason to buy. The other thing that I'd say is, a lot of our clients in our parent company are kind of high net worth individuals. So they have a lot of cash. They say, I want to deploy it over time. But for someone who may be in their 20s or early 30s, I wouldn't get lost in the details of trying to time the market of saying, I got to wait for it to be down 5%. For you, just get in. And every time you have more money, get in again. Don't try to time it because, again, sometimes the market goes up a year and you don't get a 10% correction,
Definitely. Great. We have another question. Investment options have changed significantly over time. I'm hearing terms like cryptocurrency, NFT, Bitcoin. Is it worth it?
So this is a loaded question, and Lindsay, feel free to jump in with any of this. I'll give my 2 cents. So, I don't think, unlike a company, right? If you buy Johnson & Johnson, you can look at its balance sheet, you can look at its earnings. There's fundamentals behind it. Cryptocurrency, it's not that it's a bad asset, but it's similar to gold, where there's no currency, there's no company behind it, there's no operation. So you're buying it, and the only way you make money is if you find someone else that you can sell it to who wants to pay you more than you bought it for, right? So I haven't met anyone, and we talk to a lot of professionals who know exactly where crypto is going. Cryptocurrency, or the idea where you can similar to a bank where you can put money in and get an 8% return on it. It's not a bad avenue to pursue, but just know that it's not the same as a bank account, right? So if you put your cash in a bank account, if JP Morgan goes out of business, it's FDIC insured, which means the government will compensate you for those losses. If the online crypto bank goes out of business, you lost your business, right? You lost your money. For Bitcoin and crypto, the other thing that you should know is a lot of people say, well, it diversifies my portfolio. It's kind of like I bought a house and now I invest in the market, that diversifies me. That was true about 3 years ago. What's really interesting, what we're seeing is that the correlation between Bitcoin and the S&P 500, which is the US stock market, is actually increasing. So it's not providing you any diversification. If the stock market drops 30%, there's a pretty good chance your crypto is dropping significantly too. So compared to other like gold or, the US dollar, you're actually getting less diversification by going into crypto.
Yeah, we tell most of our clients, because people want to, invest in these areas that are kind of fun, to have a portion that you would consider your fund money, and maybe that's what you put in cryptocurrency. And then anything you're trying to invest for maybe a specific goal, like a house or something like that, to actually invest in with more of a professional feel of it and within stocks like Rob was talking about before.
Great. That makes a lot of sense. Another question was about apps like Cash App, investing through those. Do you have any ideas or any recommendations about that?
Yeah, so Lindsay actually probably can answer this one. I know she's worked with Acorn and some others, but we're pretty agnostic. Our view is like, we're here to give you advice, holistically. So we never push one app over the other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly how we approach it. So like, I personally am so utterly uninterested in apps like Robinhood because I don't want to buy and sell individual stocks. Some students get so into it. They think it's really fun. They really like to do the research into the different stocks and whatnot. I'm not going to yuck somebody's yum and say like, this is just really bad all the time. It goes back to sort of our philosophy. If you're getting returns and like, you know where your money is going, it's a fine option.
Great. Yeah, I think Darren said also like MetaMask. There's so many interesting new apps that like keep coming out. I keep hearing about. But another thing I think we hear from younger people, especially, is environmentally friendly investing, avoiding fossil fuel industries and things like that. Is that a good way to go, or is there some more risk involved with that?
Yeah, so we're firm believers that you should be aligning your values with your investments if that's important to you. Now, some people say, all I care about is the return. Well, that's great. And you know that. If some people say the environment's really important to me, then I think you should be able to align your values and your investments. I'll say a few things. It's really tricky. So people throw around these terms called ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, meaning, the investment that I make, it gets high ratings for its environmental treatment. It treats its worker and society well, and it treats its investors well, right? That by definition is an arbitrary measurement, right? And who is measuring it changes, right? So you could argue that Exxon should never be high in ESG because it's a fossil fuel company. You could also argue that what NextEra or Exxon are doing is they are now the biggest or one of the biggest investors in clean energy because they're so big, right? So they're clearly like trying to transform themselves. So do they count as ESG or not? That's a complicated question. I don't know. The other thing is you should know it's going to affect your returns, right? So in 2020, during the pandemic, oil and gas really performed poorly. So if you were in a ESG fund, you far outperformed the market because oil and gas far underperformed the market and you didn't hold any of that. In 2021, oil and gas far outperformed the market. So if you're an ESG fund, you probably underperform the market, right? So knowing that you're basically siphoning out certain companies if they meet what you think or someone else thinks is ESG or environmentally friendly is going to affect your portfolio.
And it is becoming more popular. There's more option than there used to be. So as Rob is saying, figuring out which the fund you're investing in, what they actually are holding, you do have more options than you used to have. So it is possible if it's high importance to you.
Great. We have another question. How much risk is involved now in investing in real estate? If you have any opinions on that.
Yeah. So, and anyone can jump in here. Carol Ann and I don't have to answer all of them, but so real estate, there's multiple ways you can get exposure to real estate. I'll just give you two. So if you're ready to buy a house, then, that's a lot of concentration in one investment asset. That's not bad. You just need to, and this is probably a separate conversation in general, so feel free to reach out to us, but your timeline matters, where you're buying matters. A lot of people forget of the additional costs. A lot of people just think of, I can rent the property later. That's a big thing in our generation. I'll buy a house now and then I'll rent it later. Or, they say, well, why am I paying rent to someone else? I should pay it to myself. All of these kind of cliche statements are partially true and partially misleading, right? So you just need to understand where they're true and where they're misleading. The other thing is you can get real estate in the stock market. So if you don't have, $30,000 to put on a down payment for a home, you can still get invested in real estate through what are called REITs. It's REIT. And those are companies that exclusively buy real estate. And you can buy an apartment REIT, you can buy a mall REIT, you can buy an office building REIT, so you can expose yourself to different real estate. That's slightly less risky, but again, that's probably a big topic in itself. So I apologize if I only half answered it.
Very interesting. Yeah, I've never heard of that before. And another thing another question is, what is fun for you about investing? And maybe what can be fun for people. I think what's interesting about investing now and must have changed over the years is like, I know I log in almost every day just to see how my investments are doing. And I'm sure like people didn't have eyes on it so like granularly before, but do you think that can be like a fun thing, or is there is that kind of a danger, like you said, because people panic?
Yeah, I mean, it's both, right? Like there's nothing like seeing you increasing money and having done nothing, right? Like you can go to sleep, take a nap, and wake up and be like, I just made $100. Like that's pretty cool, right? That can be addictive. So it's fun and it can get you engaged. On the other hand, it can also tie your emotions to it in a way that isn't sustainable. So, we give a mobile app or an app to our clients where they can track their performance on a daily basis. But we specifically ask them not to do that because it's very hard to watch it go like this. What we care about is over the long run, are we hitting your goal? And it's going like this, right? Mm-hmm. If you're looking individually, it's tough. For me, I got into the profession not because I personally am like enthralled with investing. I'm very passionate about in college, I got very passionate about investing in terms of the wealth gap. So, 40% of the US stock market is owned by the top 1% of income earners in America. So, there's a lot of reasons why we have a growing wealth gap in America, political and other. But I think one big one that is, from my perspective, ignored or largely ignored is the fact that, wealthy Americans or middle-class Americans put a lot of their wealth in the market. And then a huge population of Americans who don't know enough or aren't educated enough and have the ability to don't. So they're relying on stagnant incomes, and the wealthiest Americans are relying on the stock market, which historically goes up much faster and higher. So, I just get passionate about it because I like every person that we can educate and bring into the stock market, and they get passionate about it means that, you're fighting that force. But I don't know if you.
Yeah, no, I mean, similar. I think what I find fun about it is talking to people that have no one else to talk to and helping them reach the goal. Like it's a lot of fun to see their money grow and them ultimately get to go on that vacation or pay off the student debt in the way that they had planned it, and we help them get there. So I think much more than like looking at stocks and bonds on a daily basis, that's actually what I find most fun about it.
That's great. And so I guess that kind of goes into what kind of clients you represent. Do you have to make a lot of money to, engage with Alooola, or is it usually, I think you mentioned it sort of can be anyone?
Yeah, so we have no minimums. That's kind of the whole reason Alooola was created, is to, as Rob was saying, to reach this group of people that no one else is touching. And we found that you can go online and use a lot of these apps that have been mentioned, which are great, but if you don't know really what you're doing, sometimes it can be hard to figure out how to start. So we would try to create something where you can talk to someone while also having that technology. So we don't have any minimums at all, and really we'll work with anyone who's looking for help and wants financial advice.
Yeah, as long as you have a Social Security, that's the one hiccup.
Yeah.
But if you have a Social Security and we have no minimums.
Wonderful. Colleen asked, she hears a lot about people living off the interest they made on their stock. How much do you have to invest to reach that point?
It kind of depends. So it depends on how much you need to make, right? Obviously, and this is where everyone loves to ask the question, how am I doing compared to my peers my age? You could have someone who has very little amount of money, but they also don't spend very much. So they're going to be fine forever. And you can have someone who makes a ton, but if they're spending millions of dollars, they may run out of money still. So the way you do it, or the way we tend to do it, is try to come up with a financial plan, which says like, this is your amount of your expenses and how much money you need to be getting off of your investments. So our general rule is assume you get 5% off of what you're investing. And that's kind of the amount you could take out safely without eating into that base principal amount. But yeah, we try to individually work with the person to figure out their number. There's not like a specific number that.
Yeah. So just to give an example, like if you say I need $50,000 to live on, and I want to have that, like the money not go down to zero, then 5% of $1 million, that's probably what you need to save. You need to have about $1 million to generate 50,000 at 5% and have no effect, this back of the envelope on the principal. Now, obviously you can take out more than that or take out 50,000 from less than $1 million, but it'll slowly eat into the account over time, right? Depending on how you're invested.
And we have a question about your name. How did you come up with the name Alooola?
So we regret it because it turns out everyone puts 2 O's and there's 3. But the reason we did it was Alooola, ALULA, is the anterior feather of a bird's wing. So it's not integral to flying, but it kind of helps guide the bird and helps its flight. So we kind of thought about it as we're not here to tell you what to do with your finances. We're here to help kind of be a guide to you and help you follow your own path. And then the parent company of Alooola has 3 principal tenants that, that's why the 3 O's are there. So it's a little convoluted, but that's it.
So does anybody else have any questions? All right, well, thank you all so much for attending today. We hope if anybody wants to mention some takeaways before we go, you're welcome to engage. But if not, we really appreciate you all coming out, and we hope we can do this in person next year and provide a dinner. So let's hope things get back to normal soon. So thank you so much. It will be posted on the ARC YouTube page. This has been recorded, so it will be posted. So if you want to share this with any of your friends or colleagues or anybody, please do. Thank you all so much.